Welcome to Cinemophile, where we bring you the best in independent, documentary, and foreign films, and we talk to the people who made them. I'm your host, Mike Caspar, and you can find out more about the program by going to cinemaphilepod.com. Rosemead centers on an ailing woman who uncovers a terrifying secret. Her teenage son is consumed by violent impulses. As her own health rapidly declines, she is forced into a desperate struggle. How far will she go to stop what she fears is becoming, and what will she be willing to sacrifice to protect her son? The film is called Rosemead. We're joined today by the director, Eric Lin. Eric, welcome to Cinemophile.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. It's a terrific film in a lot of ways. It's structurally, it works really well in terms of character development and the story itself. I know this was written by Marilyn Fu. How
Mhm.
did she come to you with the project? Did you know that she was working on it? How did this come about?
Our producers, Andrew Corkin and Theo James, had read the LA Times article written by Frank Xiong about this case, about the true events. It sort of haunted them. They weren't sure if it was going to be a documentary or something, but they wanted to sort of amplify the message. They ended up bringing on Minette Louie, another one of our producers. And Minette and I had worked together a lot. You know, I have a career as a cinematographer, and I'd shot feature for Minette and some other projects. And we always talked about working together. And so she's the one who actually brought the article to Marilyn Fu, our screenwriter. And so all the producers worked with Marilyn for about a year together to get a draft together. And then they started going out for directors. And luckily, Minette thought of me. I read the article and the script, and it completely broke my heart. I mean, Marilyn did a beautiful job of taking Frank's incredible reporting and making it an emotional journey, and creating these characters, the lives of these characters around kind of like these facts that we were able to hear about in that article. I saw my own family inside that story, and it's a story about an immigrant family that faces impossible choices, and something we haven't seen on screen before. So I thought it was a completely urgent story that I could tell truthfully and honestly, but it took us 7 years to tell it.
As is almost always the case, these things are people who are out on the outside looking in think, oh, I'll just go out and make a movie in a
Yeah.
couple of years, fame and fortune. Very, 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 very rarely does something like that happen. And that 7 years sounds about right. At what point did Lucy Liu, who plays the part of Irene in the film, did she become a part of the project?
She came on very early on after I got attached. Me and Marilyn started working on kind of a final revision, and then we felt like the script was strong enough to go out. We all talked about what kind of actresses could portray Irene, and Lucy was the top of our list. Her career has always been super interesting because I think she's been really fearless in her choices of roles, and we've never seen her take on a role like this. So we sent it to her, very traditional route. We sent it to her agent, and we just hoped that it was something she connected with, and she absolutely did. We ended up meeting with her shortly thereafter and just talking. We completely talked about what touched her in the script, and we really connected about how much, the script meant and story meant to us.
It's hard to believe, but I believe I'm right when I say this is the first film where she's been the lead
That's
without
right.
any question. She's been in a lot of movies where she was co-lead, but this is the first time. That's hard to imagine.
It is. It shocked us too when we heard that too, because someone mentioned it, and we're like, "Wow, that's wild." Because her career, I grew up watching her. So many people have, and she has such a striking presence on screen. And yeah, it's hard to imagine, but as you can see, she's well deserved of all the praise she's getting for her performance, because it's been a long time coming, and she clearly knocked it out of the park.
Absolutely. As Irene, she is very subdued, very supportive, very much about her family. And what is interesting about the structure of the film, which I mentioned at the beginning, is there's a couple of flashbacks we see fairly early on in the film that begin to pull you in terms of what exactly has happened in the past. Obviously, this is something from their family's past, and how is that going to play out? And then we go to the present, and Irene is dealing with her own health issues. And then we begin to see how her son is going through his own. I like the way that you positioned the characters in the story to be able to really widen out a story that I think will resonate with a lot of different people for a lot of different reasons. Tell us a little bit about the structure and just am I on the right track to say it that way?
Our approach in making the film was always about, the central idea that all of their actions were rooted in their love for each other, no matter what kind of like where things went. A key part of that was sort of this idea of wanting to protect each other from things that they, thought the other person feared or would worry about. So, in Irene's case, her health, she sort of hides how where it's going from Joe and Joe as well. He sort of hides how his conditions are getting increasingly severe from her. Within the same house, though, they're close quarters and they have this bond, but they are doing these things to protect each other. And narratively, we really want to stay very subjective with both of their characters. We see them together, and I always thought of them as sort of like an island. See them sort of floating through the mall. There's a lot of people around them. But they have this sort of language and behavior together that's very different from them when they, interact with someone that's not outside that sort of bubble. And then when we're inside the house, we're very, very close with Joe as he sort of uncovers things about Irene's health. And then we're very, very close with Irene as she sort of uncovers things about Joe's conditions. And we learn about through their eyes. So staying so subjective, I think helps that narrative tension, because they start to guess, they start to, wonder what is going on. It's this thing where that unspoken tension sort of underlies everything. As they sort of discover more and as the film progresses, that sort of very narrow point of view, I think helps accentuate sort of the isolation that they experience. We get this great view of Irene later in the film where she's standing against the wide shot of San Gabriel Valley. And for me, it's so striking because so much of the film we've been so close to her, and then you see her in this context, and it's just she feels so alone. So it's very much, yeah, by design, like trying to keep us very, very close to their point of views and how they learn about each other and these things that they learn about each other and how they feel like they have to protect each other.
And their own sense of collective loss
Yeah.
with their father and husband, which adds to that layer, another layer of grief. I think this film, as I said, will resonate with a lot of people who, wherever your cultural background might be, are
Mhm.
reticent to essentially come forward and be open and honest about what's going on with themselves, and also kind of the idea of some sort of public shame or some version of that. While it's specifically about a particular Asian family, Asian community, it should resonate with anyone who watches it.
Yeah, it has, and that's been what's been amazing about sharing the film. At festivals, and then we did a week run in New York and LA recently. Is audience would talk about that, how this sort of, we made it, yeah, exactly as you said, very specifically about this Chinese immigrant family in San Gabriel Valley, California. People from all sorts of backgrounds in the audience talk about how, yeah, in my community, similar things, maybe not exactly the way it functions, but, we're reluctant to share about this, or we hide this fact, or, even though, yeah, we feel like we're very communicative, we never talk about this thing. So it does touch on something that I think is very, primal for a lot of people and families, this idea of protecting the families and not willing to be vulnerable or not, not wanting to burden other people, to some degree, it exists across all of our cultures.
There is also a recognition, enough of a recognition to where Joe is getting some help. He's
Yeah.
at least gone to that point where it's an opportunity for him to deal with what he's going through. That is the question often in a situation like this is not only is there an internal family dynamic, then there's kind of the outside
Mm.
pressures of the world that you live in, and not wanting to admit that you're vulnerable, that you might not be able to do it yourself.
Yeah.
And then there is the individuals who just have to come to grips with it. And that's maybe the hardest part is to face down your demons, if you will. If that's how you see it,
Yeah.
your personal demons. And in Irene's case, it's particularly difficult because she feels very responsible for Joe. So the pressure on her and the pressure to be seen as sort of invulnerable is always there,
Yeah,
at least
yeah,
in her own mind anyway.
absolutely. I think you absolutely touched on a key point for her. Not showing weakness, but also that idea of projecting appearance. She's someone whose time is running out and she's trying to hold on to like, the life they had or the way that people used to think of her and them. They had this very happy family and ran a successful business. But once the father passed away, things aren't as easy as she's trying to pretend that they are. And I think she's trying to maintain that image. And I think that's part of it too, is also that she's having trouble imagining a happy, healthy life for Joe if she is no longer around. I think she has trouble imagining that there could be people that would care for him, and it takes like a tribe, to care for him the way she has if she's not there. So I think that undergirds a lot. Yeah.
I just want to remind our listeners we're speaking with Eric Lin. He is the director of a new film called Rosemead. It's out now. I believe we're out in theaters
In Los Angeles,
as we speak, right?
and then it'll be out we'll do a wider release nationwide on January 9th, so in the new year. So look out for it.
Happy New Year to you. What another part of the story, and this is where the filmmaking comes in. I liked the dropping of, I won't call them hints. That's a little too flip to say it that way, but indications of where the story is headed are brought to bear throughout the film. This is where I think the filmmaking comes into to play. Is the cinematography here is, I call it very specific kind of cinematography in the way you went about shooting this, working with your own cinematographer, Lyle Vincent, in this film. Talk a little bit about that as a director slash cinematographer, working with a cinematographer, which I often say in these interviews is the most important person on the set at the time you're shooting is your cinematographer. You have to be completely symbiotic. So how is that in terms of your working with someone, your relationship, and how would you describe the style of the cinematography?
In terms of working with Lyles, when Minette and Andrew took the leap of faith on me and let me direct the film, I knew early on that I did not want to be on set thinking about lighting, camera positions. I wanted a cinematographer I trusted, someone who I could completely give the role over to, because I knew that that would be like a crutch. That's something that, I'd be avoiding dealing with something else on set if I was worried about that. I was looking about for DPs that I, really trusted and respected. And Lyle, I've known from NYU days, and luckily he became available. Initially, his schedule was up in the air, and so we were looking around and talked to a lot of great DPs. In the end, it was just because we had this history of both being at NYU at the same time, and of course his work is incredible. I loved his lighting, I love his lensing. It was someone like we had this personal connection, and I knew that I could completely trust. And what helped in the prep, it was as a cinematographer, I felt like we could communicate very easily about what we want. We shot listed the entire film. Like what I like to do with my directors, which, we did on this film, is through each scene, we talk about like the subtext and the emotional journey, where each character is in the emotional journey. And then because we want to represent that visually, whether it's, close, far, what kind of camera movement, what kind of lighting. And so that's something that me and Lyle dove into in prep, and we were able to speak very like fluidly about it. We both had like huge libraries of images that we would throw up in our shot list and say, oh, it could be like this scene from this film, or this film, this scene from this film. And we would know what each other talked about, we were talking about, because it's not always the case. You can be in prep with a lot of creative people, and you talk about something and they're like, oh, I thought you meant that kind of blue, or that kind of green. It was a very, easy to establish a very strong foundation. So, and if I would describe the style of the cinematography, I would just say like almost ruthlessly subjective. We tried to make our framing as emotionally truthful as possible to what the characters were going through, so that the audience could experience it how the characters were, and we tried to represent that as best we could.
Well done. Just a quick shout out to Lyle Vincent, the film that he shot that I just love, and
Mhm.
it's a DP's film to me. A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night is so well shot.
Yeah, yeah,
Beautiful film.
gorgeous. Yeah, beautiful, beautiful.
Well, Eric Lin, thank you so much for indulging me in that sidetrack there with his work. The film again is called Rosemead. We have been joined today by the director, Eric Lin. Eric, all the best to you on this film, and I look forward to more. Congratulations.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on. It was great.
You have been listening to Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar, the place where you will hear from the best in independent documentary and foreign filmmakers. Please check out our previous interviews as well as upcoming interviews and special programming by going to cinemaphilepod.com. We are also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube, searchable under Cinemaphile with Mike Kaspar. Until next time, thank you for listening.